Elite professor forces young black man to solve physics problem. Not knowing he's a physics genius. He walked into the lecture hall wearing a hoodie and old sneakers, just another quiet face in the crowd. So when the elite physics professor mocked him and forced him to solve an impossible equation on the board, no one expected what happened next. But when this young black man picked up the chalk, he didn't just solve it, he changed everything. This is the story of how a hidden genius shook the foundations of an elite university. Please, before we start this story, support us by liking this video, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where you're watching from. It was orientation week at Hamilton Technical Institute, a prestigious STEM college in upstate New York. Students and parents buzzed around the main auditorium, soaking in the impressive legacy of the school. But one figure stood out, not for his attire or attitude, but because he clearly didn't belong. 18-year-old Elijah Brooks had no ID, no folder, and no official welcome letter. Wearing a faded hoodie and carrying a beat-up notebook, he sat quietly in the last row of the hall as Dr. Everett Monroe, the head of the physics department, launched into a booming welcome speech. Dr. Monroe, a tall, stern man known for his razor-sharp intellect and even sharper tongue, paced across the stage with all the pomp of a TED Talk. "Here at Hamilton," he declared, "we produce the best scientists in the world, but genius is rare, very rare." Elijah listened, eyes scanning the diagrams projected behind the professor. He wasn't there to impress anyone. He wasn't even officially enrolled. He'd shown up out of curiosity, a dare almost, to see if this place full of elite minds could teach him something he didn't already know. At the end of the speech, Monroe said, "And now, to demonstrate what real challenge looks like, let me present a problem no one in this room can solve." He turned to the board and scribbled a complex physics equation involving multivariable calculus and quantum mechanics. Murmurs spread across the room. Students leaned over to whisper guesses. Even the parents looked baffled. "Anyone?" Monroe taunted. "This problem has stumped graduate students for years." Elijah raised his hand. Laughter rippled through the room. "You?" Monroe scoffed. "This isn't math camp. Sit down." But Elijah stood. "Very well," Monroe said smugly, stepping aside. "Let's see what our guest can do." With quiet confidence, Elijah approached the board. As he worked, the room grew silent. One by one, each number and symbol flowed with elegant precision. 5 minutes passed, then 10, and then, with a final stroke of chalk, Elijah circled the answer. Dead silence. Monroe stepped forward, eyes narrowing as he scanned the solution. He didn't say a word. He just kept staring, his face draining of color. Then finally, This is correct." Whispers turned to gasps. Phones came out. Someone started recording. Elijah turned to the room. "I just came to watch," he said, grabbing his notebook. "Didn't mean to cause a scene." And with that, he walked out, leaving a stunned auditorium in his wake. Dr. Everett Monroe stood frozen in the auditorium as Elijah disappeared through the side exit. Whispers escalated into excited chatter among the students. Parents stared at each other, bewildered. Who was that kid? "Find out who he is," Monroe barked at his assistant, a flustered grad student named Max Pennington. Max scrambled out of the hall with his tablet, trying to locate Elijah before he vanished entirely. But the mysterious young man was already halfway down the hill that led to the student parking lot, his hoodie flapping behind him in the wind. Elijah didn't own a car. He walked everywhere, miles if he had to. That morning he had caught a ride from his uncle who worked construction nearby. He hadn't told anyone where he was going, not his aunt, not his younger brother. Just packed his notebook and went to see what all the hype was about. Back on campus, Monroe sat in his office, watching the footage of Elijah solving the equation on someone's phone. He zoomed in on Elijah's writing, smooth, fast, and precise. There was no hesitation, no backtracking. It was the work of someone who understood, not someone who guessed. "This doesn't make sense," Monroe muttered. "This kid, he solved an open quantum field theory riddle that our postdocs can't even touch." Max came back 20 minutes later, out of breath. "Nothing. No student records, no visitor badge. But one of the freshmen said they recognized him. From where? Some community center in Albany. Said he tutors there, teaches other kids, doesn't charge a dime. Monroe's eyes narrowed. What's his name? Elijah Brooks. The name rang no bells. Monroe searched the university applicant database. Nothing. But then he tried an open internet search. Up popped a few articles from local papers. One read, Teen Physics Whiz Wins State Science Bowl, Elijah Brooks shocks judges. Another, High School Dropout turns heads at Regional Math Olympiad. No social media presence, no college applications, just a trail of low-budget headlines and some blurry photos. Why isn't he in college? Monroe wondered aloud. Why is a mind like that sitting in the back of my auditorium, uninvited? Meanwhile, Elijah was already back at the small one-bedroom apartment he shared with his aunt and cousin. The walls were cracked, the heater barely worked, and textbooks were stacked beside a worn mattress on the floor. He flipped through pages, studying until night fell. To him, knowledge was freedom. Not fame, not glory, just an escape from the cycle of struggle that had trapped his family for generations. He didn't need applause or validation, but what Elijah didn't know was that his moment in that auditorium was already going viral, and soon the whole country would want to know who he was, and why the smartest kid in the state had never been given a shot. The next morning, Elijah woke up to the sound of his cousin Micah banging on the bathroom door, yelling about school. He rubbed his eyes and rolled off the mattress, already dreading the noise of the world again. Another day, another quiet hustle. But when he stepped into the kitchen, his Aunt Regina was holding her phone with a stunned expression on her face. Elijah, she said slowly, why is your face all over the internet? What? He muttered, pouring water into a kettle. She turned the screen toward him. There he was, clear as day, solving Dr. Monroe's impossible equation. Someone had clipped the moment, titled it, Hoodie Kid Outsmarts Physics Professor at Hamilton Tech. It already had 2 million views. Elijah blinked. They filmed that? His aunt put the phone down and gave him a serious look. You went up to Hamilton just to watch, right? Yeah, that's all. Boy, you shook up their whole world. Just then there was a knock at the door. Not the usual tap-tap from neighbors or mailmen. This one was heavy, urgent. Elijah opened it to find Max Pennington, doctor, Monroe's assistant, standing on the porch with a briefcase and 2 coffee cups. You're a hard guy to find, Max said, offering one of the cups. Mind if I come in? Regina nodded reluctantly and Max stepped inside, glancing at the modest home. We owe you an apology, he said to Elijah. Doctor? Monroe. Well, he didn't treat you with much respect, but he's intrigued. Very intrigued. Elijah raised an eyebrow. Why? Because you solved a problem that shouldn't be solvable for someone who's never even seen our lab. Max opened the briefcase and pulled out an envelope. Inside was an offer letter. You're being invited to enroll at Hamilton Tech. Full ride, housing, meals, books, everything covered. Regina nearly dropped her tea. Elijah sat back, stunned. There's more, Max added. Dr. Monroe wants to meet with you personally. Today, if you're free. Elijah didn't answer right away. He dreamed of this, sure, but on his terms. Not because of some viral video. Not because people were suddenly curious. He didn't want to be a mascot or someone's redemption story. But then he looked at his aunt, who had worked 3 jobs to keep them afloat. At Micah, who looked up to him like a superhero. He turned back to Max. I'll go, he said, but I'm not doing this for applause. Max smiled. Fair enough, Monroe just wants to talk. And just like that, Elijah Brooks, the kid no one noticed yesterday, was now being welcomed into the very institution that had once turned him away. But this was only the beginning. Elijah stepped through the glass doors of Hamilton Tech's physics department that afternoon, his hoodie replaced with a borrowed dress shirt from his uncle. The hallway smelled like varnish and coffee. Everything polished, everything expensive. It felt like another world, one that didn't usually have space for kids like him. Max led him down a sleek corridor and stopped at a large wooden door with a silver nameplate. Dr. Everett Monroe, Department Chair, Theoretical Physics. Inside, Monroe was waiting. Elijah, he said stiffly, standing behind his desk. Glad you came. Elijah nodded, saying nothing. "I'll be honest," Monroe continued, gesturing for him to sit. "When I saw you walk into that auditorium, I judged you. Wrongly. But your work on that board, it was more than correct. It was inspired." "I wasn't trying to prove anything," Elijah replied. "That's exactly why it's impressive," Monroe said. "But one equation doesn't make a physicist. Understanding happens in application. So today, I'd like to see how you handle real-world variables." Elijah's brows lifted. "You want to test me?" "In the lab," Monroe said. "No tricks, no showmanship, just physics." They descended to the basement level, where high-tech labs lined the corridor. In one, a whiteboard stretched across the far wall, covered in differential equations. Monitors blinked beside an experimental particle motion setup, lasers, prisms, and motion sensors forming a web of precision. "This is the LCS," Monroe said. "Laser-controlled suspension. It's a prototype system used to test subatomic behavior in magnetic interference fields." Elijah stepped closer, eyes scanning the equipment like he was reading a children's book. "The last group of grad students couldn't get this to align with predicted values," Monroe continued. "Their measurements kept diverging at high frequency. I want to see what you can do." "No pressure, right?" Elijah cracked his knuckles and asked for 5 minutes alone. Monroe, curious, stepped out but watched through the observation glass. Inside, Elijah moved with quiet focus. He adjusted one sensor, changed the angle of a prism, and recalibrated the base frequency. 3 moves that immediately stabilized the readings. He paused, then scribbled new math on the board. Corrections to a flawed frequency conversion formula, something no one else had caught. Monroe stared in disbelief as the system returned near-perfect alignment. He walked back in slowly. "How did you know the frequency needed modulation?" "It was the lag in the laser feedback," Elijah said casually. "It wasn't matching the sensor oscillations. I just synced them." "Just synced them," Monroe repeated, stunned. Elijah turned. "You said this was about application." "It was," Monroe said, "and you just rewrote a section of our lab manual in 10 minutes. He smiled, genuinely this time. "Elijah Brooks, welcome to Hamilton Tech." But Monroe wasn't just impressed, he was rattled, because he was beginning to realize that this kid might not just belong here. He might be smarter than everyone else in the building. It didn't take long for news of Elijah Brooks's lab success to ripple through Hamilton Tech like an electrical surge. In 1 week, he went from being an unknown face in a hoodie to a campus legend. Professors murmured his name in hallways. Students stared at him in the cafeteria like he'd walked straight out of a Marvel movie. But not everyone was celebrating. At a faculty luncheon, Dr. Sylvia Grant, senior theoretical physicist, stabbed her salad with irritation. "So we're handing out lab access now to every math prodigy that walks in off the street?" Dr. Monroe, seated beside her, kept his tone even. "Elijah didn't just walk in. He solved a Tier 3 unsolved model in quantum field theory and stabilized the LCS prototype. Nobody else has done that." Sylvia scoffed. "And you think that means he's ready to jump into graduate-level work? No SAT scores, no credentials, no academic record to even track." "Genius doesn't always wait for credentials," Monroe said, though even he felt the discomfort in the room. Hamilton was a fortress built on pedigree and polish. Elijah didn't fit the mold, and that scared people. Meanwhile, Elijah was doing what he always had, keeping his head down and his mind moving. He spent nights in the physics building, solving problems just for the joy of it. Max tried to show him around campus, introduce him to other students, but Elijah remained distant. "I'm not here to make friends," he said. "I'm here to learn." Still, trouble brewed. In one seminar, a student named Troy Hastings, whose dad happened to be a major donor, spoke loud enough for Elijah to hear. "This school's turning into a circus. What's next? TikTok stars in the engineering program?" Elijah didn't respond. He didn't have to. The next day, he quietly posted a revised solution to one of Troy's failed thesis problems on the department's public board, with annotations in red, correcting Troy's math line by line. Not a word was said, but the message was received. Later that week, Elijah was called to Monroe's office. "I wanted to warn you," Monroe said carefully. "Some people aren't happy about your place here. There's pressure from donors, from other departments." "You thinking of pulling the offer?" Elijah asked, his voice calm but steady. "Number, not for a second," Monroe replied. "But I want you to know that if you stay, it won't be easy. You'll be challenged at every turn, more than anyone else." Elijah looked out the window. The campus stretched before him, sunlit and intimidating. Then he looked back at Monroe. "I've never had anything easy," he said, "but I've never backed down either." Monroe nodded. "Then brace yourself, because you've just become the most disruptive force Hamilton Tech has seen in years." And Elijah knew it. For once, that didn't scare him. It lit a fire. A storm rolled in over Hamilton Tech one Friday afternoon, thunder crackling above the marble towers and glass labs like a warning. Inside the physics building, Elijah was hunched over a terminal in Lab 3B, working on something no one had asked him to. After weeks of lab work, he had begun to notice inconsistencies in the department's magnetic field experiments. Small errors, tiny enough to overlook, except he couldn't. Using the lab's raw data, he had quietly rewritten the simulation parameters for a major upcoming experiment on controlled gravitational ripples. It was supposed to be the department's crown jewel, but the math wasn't just off. It was flawed at its core. He printed out his notes, a stack of papers nearly 2 inches thick, and headed toward Dr. Monroe's office, heart racing. On his way up the staircase, he ran into Dr. Sylvia Grant. "You again," she muttered, clearly irritated. Elijah nodded politely, tried to walk past, but she stepped in his path. "I've reviewed your lab logs," she said. "You're poking around things you weren't assigned. This isn't a playground. You don't get to rewrite the work of people who've spent decades earning their place here." He held her gaze. "Then maybe they should have spent more time getting the math right." Her face flushed. "Watch yourself, Mr. Brooks." He didn't flinch. "No disrespect, Dr. Grant, but physics doesn't care about resumes. It only cares about the truth." He stepped past her and continued to Monroe's office, knocking twice before entering. Monroe looked up from a file and gestured him in. "I found something," Elijah said without preamble, placing the stack of papers on the desk. "Your gravity model, it's wrong. The calculations assume field isolation at 0.006 frequency variance, but the surrounding lab equipment creates interference beyond that. You're not measuring gravitational ripple. You're measuring noise." Monroe blinked, picked up the first page, and began to read. He flipped through the pages faster and faster, eyes wide. "My God," he muttered. "You're right. We've been chasing shadows." Elijah took a step back, suddenly aware of the weight of what he was saying. "That experiment goes live in 2 weeks. If it fails, it could blow years of funding, reputations." Monroe sat back, stunned. "How did you catch this?" "I couldn't sleep." For the first time since they met, Monroe didn't see Elijah as a curiosity or a genius from the wrong side of town. He saw him as something else entirely, essential. "I have to present this to the board," Monroe said. "They won't like it. But this could change our entire trajectory." Elijah nodded. "I don't care if they like it. I just want them to get it right." Outside, lightning cracked across the sky. Inside, Monroe smiled to himself. He had once doubted Elijah Brooks. Now he realized something far more terrifying and exhilarating. 2 weeks later, the Hamilton Tech auditorium was full again. But this time, it wasn't for orientation. Faculty from across the country had flown in. Journalists set up cameras near the back. The entire physics department was on edge. Today was the public demonstration of the revised gravitational ripple experiment, and at the center of it all was Elijah Brooks. Not as a guest, not as a kid with potential, but as lead presenter. Dr. Monroe stepped up first, clearing his throat at the podium. "Today's presentation is not what we originally planned," he began. 2 weeks ago, our experiment was headed toward a public failure. That failure was avoided because someone had the courage to question everything, even the work of those considered beyond critique. He turned toward Elijah, who stood waiting in front of the revised setup. "This is Elijah Brooks," Monroe said, "and this breakthrough is his." Gasps rippled through the audience. Elijah stepped forward, heart pounding, but hands steady. He walked them through the corrected variables, the interference adjustments, the recalibrated sensors. He didn't stumble. He didn't apologize. Then he flipped the switch. The system hummed to life. Lasers crisscrossed the room in perfect symmetry. Data streamed across the monitors, smooth, stable, and correct. On the big screen, the simulated gravitational wave appeared like a ripple across glass. The room erupted into applause. Even Dr. Sylvia Grant stood clapping, though she didn't meet Elijah's eyes. But that was fine. He didn't need her approval anymore. Afterward, people surrounded him. Professors, students, journalists. "How did you learn all this?" one asked. "Do you come from a science family?" asked another. "No," Elijah replied simply. "I come from a place where if you don't teach yourself, you don't learn." Max, watching from the back, beamed with pride. He elbowed Monroe and said, "Told you. He's not just smart, he's different." Monroe nodded. "He's what this place needed, even if we didn't know it." That night, Elijah sat alone in the quiet of the lab. The building had emptied, but he wasn't in a rush to leave. He looked at the same equations on the board and smiled. He remembered how far he'd come, from a neighborhood where kids didn't dream this big, to a campus that now couldn't stop talking about him. Then his phone buzzed, a new email. Subject: National Science Fellowship Nomination Center, American Physics Society. He opened it. Monroe had submitted his name. Elijah leaned back, eyes scanning the night sky through the lab ceiling window. For the first time, he didn't just feel like he belonged. He felt limitless. Elijah Brooks came to Hamilton Tech as an outsider, dismissed and underestimated. But through brilliance, resilience, and the courage to challenge the system, he not only earned his place, he redefined what genius looks like. His journey is a powerful reminder that greatness can come from anywhere. And sometimes it's the people no one sees coming who make the biggest impact. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful true life stories. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder to never let the world define their worth. Thanks for watching.